Hi guys, welcome to another Q&A edition of Behind the Sawdust. I have here 4 compelling Qs and I'm going to provide the smart As. So let's get started. This one's related to a video we just released about using core box bits to make virtually any custom molding profile you can imagine. I'll put a link to that video in the notes below the video. You should check it out. The simple answer though is a core box bit is a cove cutting bit that doesn't have the bearing. But it's interesting to consider how it got the name core box, and that takes us back to the metal casting trades. In order to create a hollow area inside a cast part, such as an engine block, a metal cylinder had to be inserted into the mold before they did the final pour. Those cylinders were called cores, and they were cast ahead of time, at least in the old-timey days, in a wooden mold called a, you guessed it, core box. Pattern makers might use what was called a core box plane. Stanley made one, called it their 57, to create each half of that mold. Core box router bits cut the same semicircular shape as that plane, and the name stuck. Some people just call them round nose bits, which if you think about it, makes a lot more sense, especially if you aren't familiar with the tools of the old-timey pattern maker. But modern woodworkers just have to keep in mind that they're cove cutting bits that don't have a bearing on top. But that makes them more versatile because they can be plunged into a workpiece to cut a more complete half-circular shape. This is very useful in many situations, especially for creating molding profiles. The simple answer to that question is, does it cut well? A chisel, or any tool for that matter, is sharp enough when it performs to your expectations. But there are several tried and true tests to check its sharpness. For this test, hold a tool up to a light source and look carefully at the intersection between the bevel face and the back of the tool. Imperfections will reflect light back at you. If no light is reflected from that fine edge, it's sharp. For this test, place the edge on one of your fingernails and apply light pressure as you attempt to shave the surface of the nail. If the tool easily skids across the surface, it's dull. If it immediately catches on the nail and tries to dig in, it's sharp. Perhaps the best way to test an edge is to just put it to wood. I keep a scrap of soft pine on hand for that purpose. A sharp tool should shave the ends of the fibers cleanly. A dull tool will tear or crush the fibers. Case hardening happens when wood isn't dried properly. A board may look nice and straight, but when you take it to your shop and you rip it on the table saw, it starts to warp and twist right away. If you haven't experienced it before, you will eventually. A simple way to explain it is when the outside wood fibers dry and therefore shrink at a much faster rate than the inner fibers, tension's created. That tension may be held in check by the outer fibers, but when you cut into the board, it can be released and the board warps. This is really considered a serious defect and a cause for returning the material to the dealer or the mill. A good mill will steam their boards at the end of the drying process to minimize the chance of case hardening. So how can you determine if a board is case hardened? Unfortunately, you can't tell just by looking at it. You have to do a test. So, starting from the end, about 2 inches from the end, cross-cut some 1-inch pieces. Lay those pieces so that one of the fresh end grain faces are up, and cut a couple of curves in the end like you're making the tines for a fork or a comb. If these tines quickly bend inward, closing the curves, the wood's case hardened. Take it back to the mill. This is a very common problem. In fact, I was watching a video on the Make Something channel the other day and David was stumped by the same issue. Fortunately, there's an easy solution. Clean your rollers. Resin buildup can cause them to lose their grip. So a rag with some naphtha is all you need to take care of it. Resist the urge to hold the rag on the roller while the planer is on and the rollers are spinning. It might be a quicker way to do it, but it's a good way to lose your hand. After you clean the rollers, apply a coat of paste wax to the bed of the planer, let it dry, and buff it nice and smooth so your boards will slide easily across. That should solve your problem, even if your rollers are a little worn. Now, depending on the type of wood you run through it, you may have to repeat the process fairly frequently, especially if you work with a lot of resinous woods like pine. That's it for this Q&A edition of Behind the Sawdust. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. And for more woodworking tutorials, tips, and tricks designed to make you a better woodworker, check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. You can read and subscribe for free at stumpynubs.com. It's a great place to sit back and have a cold one, because you've earned it, my friend.